do another teaching related to diversity. The last time Monique was in Africa, back in March, I did an explainer video where I talked about what I called the noble version of diversity, and then the version of diversity that seems to show up in the real world. And so I wanted to kind of continue that conversation. And maybe if one of my moderators is on here, you can find that part one on the Center for Biblical Unity YouTube page. It'll be listed under the family meetings from last March. But I wanted to continue that and really focus today on defining diversity, because this is a slippery term. And so the next time you hear your pastor use the word diversity or your boss use the word diversity, I want to kind of give you some help in asking some better questions and having the conversation with your HR director or the person might be at the ministry that you work at, the church that you work at. When people start using the word diversity, how can we engage with them in a conversation to get to understanding in how they are using the term? Because what I find is that what people think diversity is usually is not what it actually is in the real world and how it shows up. And yet, when we hear the term diversity, it is almost universally accepted as the key to success. If you have ever had to be in a diversity training, I'm sure that you have heard something akin to this. That diversity is the key to success. Diversity is seen in our culture and even in most Christian spaces to be almost an unquestioned, unchallenged, universal good. And when you come up against it, if you start asking too many questions, people will kind of look at you a little bit sideways, because how dare you question this thing that is the universal good? And it is perplexing to people that you would even ask these annoying questions. And so I want to help you just get a better understanding of this idea. So when you think about diversity, some of the things that you're going to hear, and this is from an HR training website. I pulled this from their article on diversity on their website, and it kind of summarizes the benefits of diversity. And if you've ever been in this conversation, you will likely have heard things to this effect. Things like, well, it benefits us because, all right, it benefits us in the workplace and our organization, our institution, our Christian ministry, our church, because it helps boost collaboration. Companies that with inclusive leadership improve collaboration. They'll throw some statistics at you, what that really means. I have a lot of questions like, well, what kind of collaboration are we talking about? What are the nature of these improvements? What is the manifestation of these? Decision-making. An inclusive workplace enables employees to make better decisions. Well, better according to what? These are the kinds of questions you have to inquire about. Well, how does inclusive hiring help us make better decisions? What exactly are the mechanics of that? How does it work operationally? Team performance. Diversity workplace efforts and inclusion at work make for 17% better team performance and prompt employees to work 12% harder. I have so many questions about these numbers. So when you're talking to your HR director and they say things in the training like diversity is our success, diversity is our strength. It will help improve our performance. Well, how? How exactly is this going to work? It makes us more attractive as an employer. We will get more applicants. 2/3 of job seekers consider an organization's workplace diversity and inclusion when job hunting. I don't know about you, but if I was job hunting and a workplace was super excited about their diversity program, I probably wouldn't apply there. For me, that's probably a red flag. I don't know. Um, Stability, inclusion in the workplace makes an organization 19% more likely to retain employees. I'm curious, what's the opposite of that figure? Is it what percentage is it less likely to retain employees? I have questions. Innovation, global diversity in the workplace equates to 19% higher innovation revenue for organizations and improves profitability. But these are the kinds of talking points that you will hear and that your HR director will use to try to sell you on why we need diversity trainings. Okay. Now, another talking point you're going to hear, why diversity matters in the workplace. Again, this is from the same HR website. It says, why does diversity matter in the workplace? Well, it's simple. Modern organizations cannot afford to fall behind the curve when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. If they do, they run the risk of creating workplaces that are less productive, less stable, less attractive to new hires, unhappier, and the ultimate bottom line, less profitable. These are very typical kinds of talking points that you are likely to encounter when you start asking questions about diversity. But the question that you need to really hammer is this one, okay? Now, most of the time when Monique and I are in conversations with pastors and they talk about diversity, when we start asking the question, well, define now, what is it exactly that you're talking about? Almost always what they're really talking about is racial diversity, and that they want to have a different kind of look on their website. They want to have leadership from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. And this is usually the goal that we run into with people in a lot of the ministries and schools and churches that consult with us. But if you think that diversity is about race, you're about 10 to 15 years behind the conversation. And I want to encourage you to think about a lot of other types of diversity, some types of this diversity, and we're going to get to this toward the end when we kind of evaluate all of this in light of the Christian worldview. I would say there's some types of diversity that could be useful in the workplace, it could be helpful, and it could be biblical. There's other types of diversity that I think are not biblical and unhelpful. So, but here's a list adding to racial diversity, cultural diversity, age or generational diversity, cognitive and physical diversity, experience and education diversity, personality, and work style diversity. These are some things that I don't think inherently there's a biblical issue with. It depends on the job. It depends on what's needed for that job. So, do we need people with a wide variety of experience? Yeah, we do. Well, we don't want all our managers to have 0 to 3 years of work experience, okay? We want people with different levels of experience. We want to invest in young people and mentor them and bring them along, but we also want to invest in really high quality managers that can lend their wisdom. I think intergenerational diversity can be a good thing. And we might even consider in some situations um, physical diversity, cognitive diversity. And what they mean by cognitive diversity is people that might have ADD or ADHD or dyslexia. There might be situations where those things could be a benefit in the job. Physical diversity, sometimes we're looking for people with certain physical attributes. We need heavy boxes lifted and moved. And we need to get some men in here in our warehouse to move them. Okay, so there are a lot of different things that we can consider when it comes to diversity that I don't think are inherently unbiblical or wrong or sinful. But then there's other types of diversity that is out there. I have a second list here of diversity of this type: sexual orientation diversity, transgender diversity, worldview or religious diversity, neurodiversity. This would be things like ADHD, dyslexia, which I think in some cases on the cognitive side, as I said before, sometimes it goes under the term neurodiversity. People on the autistic spectrum, marital and home life diversity, married people, widowed people, divorced people, never been married people. Now we're getting into some kinds of diversity of polyamorous relationships and gay marriage and all of that. So there's a lot of different kinds of diversity. Political diversity. Are we only hiring Republicans? Are we only hiring Democrats? That sort of a thing. Now, these types of diversity we might have some issues with. For example, sexual orientation diversity. It's a sin issue. Are they practicing? Got to ask some questions there. Do we really need to hire people for this reason? Does it help us collaborate better and make better widgets? I have questions about that. Worldview or religious diversity. I don't know about you, but if I'm a school principal hiring a math teacher at the Christian school that I'm supervising, I don't want too much religious diversity. I don't want worldview diversity. That is not a universal good for me. It might not even be a universal good for me to hire a political progressive. That when it's connected, when someone's political beliefs are connected to their worldview beliefs, I might not want that for my students. Okay. I don't want polyamorous people working at my school. I don't want certain kinds of marital diversity. So we have to ask some important questions. Remember, our anchoring question was, what kind of diversity are we really talking about? Okay. So what we see as kind of the universal good in diversity is what I call the best case scenario. The best case scenario of outcomes of hiring diversity is hiring managers work to expand their talent pool. That's what we talked about in part 1 of our conversation back in March, and result in increased qualified applicants who would otherwise be overlooked. But the worst case scenario is where a system is designed in the HR department and it's rigged to pass over qualified people, often white, able-bodied, straight Christian Protestant people, heteronormative men, and that sort of thing, for potential hiring and promotions. Members of historically marginalized groups, we're going to define that in just a minute, for hiring or promotion are advantaged, sometimes even if they aren't fully qualified. Now, The smart HR manager will tell you, no, we're not sacrificing anyone's credentials or qualifications or education or skills or experience. We're just expanding our talent pool and kind of favoring people in these historically marginalized groups. And I think that what we have to see is, how is it showing up in the real world? And is there favoritism happening? Is there a system that is rigged in who are the qualified candidates that get selected for interviews? Because this is from that same article. I just kind of camped out one article because it had so many good summaries of the problem. This is a quote from that article. An organization makes an effort to bring more diversity to its leadership staff. In 2000, white men held over 96% of the Fortune 500 leadership positions. By 2020, that number had dropped down to about 86%, but that still means an overwhelming majority of these positions are still held by one gender and one race. Companies making an effort to increase diversity within their leadership, and that's the key. We talked about that last time, is they really look at the leadership. Who's in leadership? That's where people really want to focus on the diversity question. By actively taking time to look at candidates of different gender, sexual orientation, color, or any other trait outside the dominant one. So the underlying assumption in all of this is, if you have too many white heteronormative men, especially Christians, in leadership positions, something is wrong. Something must be done. Some correction must take place. Here's another quote. Diversity in the workplace isn't just limited to the people currently in your organization. It involves actively seeking out vendors, suppliers, customers, and clients from underrepresented parts of society. There's that phrase again. This can be an important part of workplace diversity. So the question is how do we define diversity? What is it exactly that we are talking about? Well, this is what I call kind of the beautiful vision of diversity, the beautiful goal. This is a little wheel. Hopefully you can see this. I'll try to kind of read it for you. The gold at the outside is organizational diversity. The inner ring green is external diversity, and then the blue ring is internal diversity. So here's all the different types of diversity that we could be tapping into: physical ability, gender, age, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and race. Already at that center circle, we notice diversity is not just a conversation about race or ethnicity. It is much bigger than that. Okay? Language, accent, appearance, parental status, marital status, work experience, educational background, military service, religion, nationality, geolocation, job function, seniority, management status, division or department, on the job experience, work location. Do you telecommute? Do you come to the office? And job level. This is the wheel of diversity. This is the beautiful goal that we're going to have all these people from all these different backgrounds and skill sets and experience levels and skill levels all working together to collaborate and bring about this beautiful vision in the workplace. This is the noble vision. Here's the problem with this. Here in the real world, it almost never shows up this way. This kind of hiring is almost impossible. Now, I've hired a number of people in my day. I've interviewed a lot of people and had to hire for several positions in my life as a manager. And when you are trying to fill a position in the real world, you are very limited in a number of practical ways. Here's just a few, just three. You're looking as an employer for someone with a particular skill or skills or set of experience or education. But not all of your applicants are going to fit in this skill level. Skill levels and experience and education can vary widely. When you are sifting through resumes, it can be dizzying how many different factors there are in someone's background and skill set. But you are limited by that. You are limited by the applicants who actually show up for your ad. And then you also have to not only factor in the applicant's skill sets, abilities, education, and just dealing with the real world of the number of applicants that have showed up to take the time to fill out the application. Then you also have to think in your mind about personalities. The personality of the person. Can I get along with this person? And can they get along with my existing employees? Can I imagine a team where these people work together? Because usually the other people on the team aren't in the interview room. And so you as a manager are sitting there thinking, can I imagine these people working together? Is this going to work in the real world? And these are intangibles. The personality of the candidate, the personality of your pre-existing team. You've got to, you're trying to oversee a lot of variables when you're hiring. It's hard. It's hard to think about, is this going to work? And you're taking a risk. Like, it's not uncommon for the hiring process to come down to 2 or 3 candidates. They're all qualified on paper. And then you're in the realm of the intangibles of their personality and the personality of the people that you're going to have them work with. Well, if we're just hiring somebody for the sake of diversity, if we were to go back to our list there of like, well, I really want to hire a woman or a queer person, or I need a person who has a lot of experience, but I want to diversify my team and hire some people without a lot of experience. Or there are some people that I can't hire that have certain limitations in what they do. If I need somebody to lift 100-pound boxes daily, I'm probably not hiring a 5-foot tall, 105-pound woman. Like, there's a lot of things that we have to think about in our hiring, and the beautiful, colorful wheel of diversity almost never works in the real world, especially for a small business. Like, maybe you can think about being that selective if you have a big business, but in the real world where most people work, and especially in the world of small business owners, your talent pool is very limited. And what if you're a Christian ministry and you don't necessarily want to put your ad on Indeed? Okay. You're wanting to hire someone that is ideologically aligned with you, and you want to be selective and careful in who you're hiring because you actually don't want ideological diversity. You don't want worldview diversity. And you are prioritizing other things. This is where diversity gets really unhelpful. We actually often want to hire for unity first if we're hiring in a Christian institution. And I'm talking about true, genuine unity, not just superficial unity of like, yeah, I have a Christian testimony. But we're going to highlight things in the interview process, and we're going to ask probing questions about this person to try to draw out where they are, so that when our students come to them in a vulnerable moment of needing kind of some informal wisdom and input, we know that that person is going to give godly wisdom. Okay. This is tricky. This is very tricky. And so there's a lot of times where we don't actually want to put diversity first. We want to put skill set first, or experience first, or worldview first. So in my way of thinking, diversity, this type of diversity, is not always a universal good. And to be honest, in the real world, what usually ends up happening in secular companies and in some Christian institutions is diversity hiring often, as I say, actually shows up in real life where the preference is given to the person who supports the critical social theories. If you come in there and clearly are giving a viewpoint of the critical social theories and thinking according to the framework of the critical social theories, in many work environments, that is what is preferred. And so and it's seen as diverse hiring. That's the person you're really looking for. It often results in recruiting and hiring people who actually just have and hold to a particular ideology. And that is not diversity. That is not actual diversity. I want to play a clip here from a former DEI officer. He is no longer a DEI officer. This is part of a longer interview by John Stossel, who is an independent reporter. He used to report on ABC News, but he has his own YouTube channel. This gentleman's name is Eric Smith, and Eric Smith is the founder of an entity called Free Black Thought. If you're on Twitter or X, I highly recommend giving Free Black Thought a follow. They're not a Christian organization, but they really give a platform and a voice for people like Monique. Monique's had some interactions with Mr. Smith, Dr. Smith, I should say. And even though she's a Christian, he welcomes those kinds of truly diverse perspectives on his platform. And I appreciate that. So I'm going to play this short clip, just a little highlight from this video. I do recommend that you go take the time to check out this video by John Stossel and his interview with former DEI officer, Dr. Eric Smith.
People do need to be woken up.
Yeah, and that was the point. Diversity walk or something like that, when somebody says how many people grew up in a single parent household and things like that.
If you were encouraged to attend college by your parents and your family members, take one step forward.
The diversity or privilege walk is supposed to teach us how much more or less privilege we have.
If you grew up in a household with two parents, step forward. And at the end of it, the most privileged people are in front and the least privileged people are in back. I did that, but it wasn't to guilt anybody. It wasn't to say, you need to check your privilege. It was to say, look at the world here. Look at what's going on. We should be aware of these things.
Why not tell people to check their privilege? Some of us have privilege.
Yes, but some of us are accomplished, and that's being called privilege. And I think that's unfair. It's one thing to be born on third base and act like you hit a triple. It's another thing to be born on first base and still second, right? And again, third. That's an accomplishment.
And that's frowned upon now?
Well, it's frowned upon by people who find it strategic to frown upon it, yes. If you can keep this race thing going, then you will always have a business in getting rid of racism. Even Ibram X. Kendi proposed a branch of government, right, regarding anti-racism. And what do you need to justify that? You need racism. It's in his best interest to perpetuate racism, in order to maintain a career. Then there are people who are like, wow, well, this is a, billion-dollar industry. I'm going to get in on this. Do my trainings and things like that and accuse people of racism just to keep it perpetuated, right? To keep it going so that it never goes away, so that I keep making my money or
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yes, it is.
Every big company.
Yeah.
They feel they have to.
Right, and there it is. They feel like they have to. They have to say something. They have to signal to the world that they're doing something. Whether that something is effective or not is secondary.
Is it effective?
It doesn't seem to be effective, no. In fact, it seems to be doing worse. It seems to be making people less likely to interact with people who are unlike them, because it's like a minefield now.
Less likely to interact.
Yes, yes, yes. After a training where you hear things about microaggressions, right? Microaggressions. If you ask somebody what they do for a living, somehow that's racist, right? If you learn that, then why would you take a chance?
Again, I hope you'll go watch the entire video. There is fascinating conversation with this former DEI officer, and really just talking about how these trainings are actually, in many cases, have the opposite effect. Rather than bringing people together to collaborate, it actually begins to create a culture of distrust and suspicion. Often what happens in these trainings is, we've had many people write to us over the years, that usually what happens is something along these lines where the minority group and their perspective is centered. This is typically historically marginalized or disenfranchised groups. They're described as being important and positive and worthwhile. Their heritage and culture are celebrated. Their lived experiences should be heard because they are seen as a source of truth. They have greater insights on race and oppression because of their social location. And without their voice, we cannot arrive at truth. This is the very usual narrative in many of these kinds of trainings. And just to kind of give some visual depiction here of what we're talking about when we talk about historically marginalized groups, in the matrix of oppression, we're talking about these, what are called targeted social groups. They might be ethnic minorities, biological women, which was really with the start of the feminist movement in the 60s and 70s, the transgender, genderqueer, intersex, lesbians, gay men, working class, poor people, people with disabilities, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus, pretty much anyone who's not a Christian, and the older people, the elderly, and children. These are the groups, when you hear the term historically marginalized groups, these are the groups that they are usually talking about. But that's another question that you can ask when you're in these kind of trainings is, what groups are we talking about exactly? What also happens at these trainings on the other side of the ledger is, while the minority group is centered, the majority group, which is usually the white, heterosexual, heteronormative, Christian people in the room, usually the men, but also the women to some degree, is that their culture is often criticized as being fundamentally depraved, might be called wicked, racist, sexist, privileged, ignorant, insensitive. Members of this group are instructed to listen and to validate the perspectives of those in the historically marginalized or disadvantaged groups. They are instructed to submit their own feelings, even to question their own feelings and perceptions and perspectives, and submitting them to intense scrutiny, and to decenter or silence their own voices, and told that they are largely unable to recognize truth when it comes to race issues. So if you say things like, well, I'm not a racist, they'll say, see, that's proof that you are, because you're white and you can't see it. It's this kind of Kafka trap that you can never get out of. And so this doesn't help workplace morale or collaboration when you get into a training and this is the kind of messaging that comes forward. And this, if we want to just look really quick here at the other side of the matrix of oppression, often it's diversity trainings. These are the people that would be seen as not meeting our diversity goals. White people, biological men, gender conforming, in other words, you're a man and you dress like a man, biological men and women, heterosexual people, rich, upper class, temporarily able-bodied or the able-bodied, Protestants, Christians, and adults. These are the groups that are called privileged, and they are the ones that need to be decentered and silenced. Now, I'm going to play one more quick clip from this John Stossel interview with Dr. Eric Smith and talking about his experience as a DEI trainer.
Most of the money, we hold most of the high positions. Some of that is genuine achievement, some is racism.
Yeah. So what do? You give other people the opportunity to acquire those things themselves. You get them into a good school. You bring back institutions like churches and other after-school programs. You teach them what it means to be an entrepreneur in this world. It's not just about victimhood. It's not just about white oppressors. There's some of that going on, but there's also some agency that we have, to get to where we want to go. And if we keep saying, well, there's nothing we can do, we can't win because of the white oppressor, then what is that going to do to an entire group of people? Nothing good.
And what's it going to do if you say being on time is not a good thing?
Right. Or that, a standardized English, at least having proficiency in it, is a form of oppression. What are you really doing? I mean, if you wanted to hold down a group of people without them knowing it, this woke thing is a good strategy.
Another example, this is a LinkedIn course by Robin DiAngelo.
Yes, inspired by Robin DiAngelo anyway. Yes.
Inspired.
Yes.
And this blew up on the internet. Why?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, it was Coca-Cola that got caught doing this. I show this to my students every semester as an exigence. So what do you do, conflict management? What do you do when your company does this? I actually use that example as a kind of lesson. But what was happening there is a diversity training in which whiteness in general was the problem. And the thesis statement, if you will, of this training was try to be less white.
Try to be less white means?
Try to be less European or Eurocentric or more Enlightenment driven. Try to be less classically liberal.
That's good. And again, that was Dr. Eric Smith from his interview with John Stossel. Go check it out on John Stossel's channel and make sure to click on not just the clips, but on the entire interview. And I think that what is important there is that this type of pitting the historically marginalized against the so-called privileged, this doesn't lead to greater collaboration, harmony, peace, and understanding between coworkers. That is not the fruit. And we are starting to see shifts where people who are in the privileged groups are starting to fight back. And they're like, I don't want my culture to be trashed. I don't want my kids to be told that they're less than simply because they're white. And we're going to have backlash if we continue to go in this direction. We are not going to be at peace. Elaine says, I have not had DEI training. I have had conversations about what a church should, quote unquote, look like by relatives of mine who live in a very different context from my area. And absolutely. And what they mean by be less white is be more progressive. And that's really what that means. When they tell you to be more diverse, what they usually mean by that is be more progressive. And so when we talk to people about what a church should look like, and they're complaining that there are too many white people in the local church and we need to be more diverse, the number one first question you have to get them to nail down is, what do you mean by diversity? Because we are not talking about race. We are 9 times out of 10 talking about an ideology. It is not a race conversation, but many Christians want to act like and talk like it is a race conversation, but it is not a race conversation. They want to say that this is compassionate, and if you have too many white people in your church, you're probably racist. And the antidote to that is diversity. You've got to start asking a lot of questions. And when somebody says we need to be more diverse or less white or less privileged or decentering, what they mean is be more progressive. That's 9 times out of 10. That's what they are talking about. And so another reason I say it's not actually a race issue is because people like Monique do not help companies reach their diversity goals. How it actually shows up in the real world, how diversity hiring shows up, is that Black conservatives or Chinese conservatives or Hispanic conservatives are often not seen as people who don't fill diversity goals. They're sometimes even called white adjacent. This is why, for example, a couple of years ago, when Larry Elder, who is a radio personality here in California, in Southern California, was running for governor, and Larry Elder is an attorney, he's an African-American, he's incredibly intelligent, but the LA Times ran an opinion piece. Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. You've been warned. And so this is why Black people, the race is not the issue. It's ideology. They don't like Larry Elder because he's not progressive. Okay. And this is when the idea of diversity is really a cover story for progressivism. Not always, but a lot of the time. And you have to learn to ask better questions. What do you mean when you're using the word diversity? If they are only talking about race, push further. Well, what about queer diversity? Do we need queer diversity on our church staff? Do we need to see that representation? What about disability diversity? What are we doing on that front? And how far does that extend? Do we need trans diversity? Do we need, what are all the diversity boxes that we need to check on our church staff? Because here's the thing, on our church staff, I can't find anywhere in scripture where ethnicity or culture are a requirement for a particular job in leadership. We'll talk more about that if I do a part 3 in this series at some point in the future. Now, here is the worst version of diversity. This is when diversity goes way too far. This person that you're going to watch here is Danny Lalonders, a non-binary game developer. Okay. She was hired by a game developer to create a game based on Marvel's Black Panther. She says she doesn't hire white people. They're unsafe and it's hard to work with them. She only hires people of color.
I have a team of 21 right now for Validate. It's a pretty big team. It's a crazy big team for indie games. But who is your team? Validate has a team of mostly all people of color. We have no white people on our team. I did that because I wanted to create a safe environment. And I know the best way for an environment to be safe is to be around people who are just like me. And I'm not saying that white people in the industry are creating unsafe environments. I'm not saying that. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying that sometimes it is hard to work with white people because they think that something may be okay, but it was really a microaggression. And no one wants to deal with that while you're trying to make a game that they love.
So imagine that language was reversed. Imagine that was a white person and she said, being around Black people is really hard. I don't hire them. nobody would be saying that. I'm not even sure that what she's saying is legal. Okay. And again, I'm not saying that what she is saying is consistent with best practices of many DEI hires, but this is where our hiring managers, but this is where this can go. This is where this can slide into very easily, is this type of mindset where if we go to enough trainings where we're taught, well, we're going to center minority voices and decenter white voices, and we're going to tell this group that their culture is celebrated and special and that they have special insight into race issues, but we're going to tell this other group that they need to be silent and that their culture is trash. No one in the room should be surprised to hear someone talk like this. Now, I would really hope that we wouldn't hear pastors talk like this, but it wouldn't surprise me. Okay? But whenever you hear somebody talking about diversity, you've got to have some courage and ask some questions, because this is the type of mindset that can devolve into a very bad version of diversity. And diversity, if you notice, is not primarily about race. It's about an ideology. This person that we just watched calls herself a non-binary queer person. She's a woman. She's a girl. Okay. We don't need the special names. But she wants people to know that she has a particular worldview. And in this sense, diversity becomes, again, a cover story for progressivism and progressive ideology. So when Christians start advocating for diversity and they mean well, and they think it's just a conversation about race, you have to press them. How far does this go? When you talk about a diversity of opinion or a diversity of ideology, how does that play out when we're hiring for our church staff, when we're hiring a principal at our kids' Christian school, when we're hiring to help preserve the legacy at a particular Christian ministry and institution? Okay? Yeah, and this thing about microaggressions, there's a good comment on here. So she's looking for people to not push back. Exactly. Otherwise, if you do push back, that's a microaggression. If you disagree at any level, it's called a microaggression. Absolutely, because we're decentering the voices of the privileged. We're centering the minorities. But if you're like Larry Elder or Monique Toussaint and you're a person with Black skin, but you don't hold to the ideology, well, then something's wrong with you. And that's why I say this is not a race issue. This is about an ideology. It is about seeing the world through a particular lens. Okay? So when we think about diversity trainings, the best version of diversity trainings is that participants learn about other cultures and grow in their appreciation for one another. Learning about another culture can be fun. It can be educational. It can be lighthearted. It's fun to learn about what other cultures are up to. But that has to be a two-way street. It's not, well, one culture is trash because you're white and all the other cultures are celebrated. We can't do that. Resulting in increased cooperation and production within the company. That is the best case scenario. I actually don't think that really happens most of the time. Send me your exceptions. Email me. The worst case is white shaming white people used as public examples of privilege. Those who disagree with the ideology, including the minorities in the training, are told that they are participating in systemic racism and are overlooked for hiring and promotions. Again, the best case scenario, worst case scenario, most companies are probably somewhere in between those two. But I am a skeptic that the best case scenario happens that often. And I think that there's enough messaging in the in-between space between the best and the worst that it does over time deplete morale on the team and begin to inculcate a culture of distrust. Yes, Alexandria says, they say you have internalized racism if you don't agree with the progressivism as a Black person. That's exactly right. And that's why I say this is not a conversation about race. It is a conversation about ideology and worldview. So the next time that you hear the phrase, diversity is our key to success, it is our strength, diversity is our strength, the question you're going to ask is, what kind of diversity are we talking about? Define it for me, okay? That's what I want you to come away with from this discussion, that you are going to know how to ask better questions. Are we talking about cultural diversity, racial diversity, age diversity? I think our churches probably need more age diversity sometimes on staff. I think we need more older people, to be honest. Personality and work style diversity, that can be hard. Education and experience diversity. I think that those are worthy things to think about. Are we talking about queer diversity? Are we talking about transgender diversity? Are we talking about religious diversity, worldview diversity, political diversity? What is it that we are talking about? Okay. Try to nail the person down. And this is why at the Center for Biblical Unity, we advocate for a competition of ideas. We think there need to be more public conversations like Dr. Eric Smith and his work at Free Black Thought. We want to advocate for the need for more competing models to foster shared goals and cooperation in the workplace to better serve companies. We do not think that the critical social theories plan for diversity is the best way to get to cooperation on teams and having shared goals and building trust with one another. Rather, we want to advocate for a lot of models. Our model is out there. Our model is primarily, the Biblical Unity model is primarily a Christian model for the Christian workplace. But we like the work of people like Dr. Eric Smith. I'm going to put his Twitter, some screen caps from his Twitter account up on the screen here from Free Black Thought. He had a post a while back that says, could these 7 features do more for real racial justice than current manifestations of DEI and anti-racism? What do you think? And he listed here 7 features of classical liberalism: a belief in the moral equality and moral primacy of individuals. It's actually a deeply biblical idea. Number 2, the commitment to treat all individuals equally under the law. Also a deeply biblical idea. Number 3, the rationality of these equal and equally treated individuals. Trust in the individual's rationality entails, number 4, a commitment to the right of free speech. In my opinion, this is also rooted in a deeply biblical idea, because if you're going to preach the gospel and you're going to preach the Great Commission and invite people to change their worldview by coming into Christianity, I think you have to have free speech. You have to have a world where speech is free enough for people who are rational beings, who can think and are created in the image of God, can change their minds. They can come out of Buddhism and become a Christian. Or they can even grow up as a Christian, become an atheist, and possibly come back to Christianity. We need a world where rational individuals, through free speech, and there can be a competition of ideas. And this means there's going to be a lot of bad and demonic ideas out there. But when we see the example of Paul on Mars Hill in Acts 17, it ought to inspire the Christians that when you're surrounded by a pantheon of demon gods, you give the good news and an invitation for people to change their minds, to come into a different worldview. I think that Dr. Eric Smith and Free Black Thought, these ideas that they're putting forward are deeply biblical ideas. These are not, he calls them classically liberal ideas. I don't know what his awareness is. I don't know what his religious convictions are. I don't know what his awareness is that these actually, if you come back to it, are rooted and grounded in the Judeo-Christian worldview, but they are. It's not just classical liberalism. Classical liberalism can't exist without Christianity. It's just trying to be a godless version, and we call it secular humanism, where they've stripped God out of the equation. This is another tweet that I thought was interesting, as you know, in the spirit of needing a competition of ideas. Chris Rufo on Twitter said, "My recommendation is abolish the DEI department entirely and replace it with a MEO department promoting merit, excellence, and opportunity. This is ultimately a war of values, and most Americans prefer a system of individual rights and achievement, not neo-Marxist equity." And always, whenever you hear the word equity, just substitute the word for socialism. That's what that means in most cases. So MEO, merit, excellence, and opportunity. We need a public conversation of different models in the workplace that can work in a multicultural, multiracial, multi-age and generational context, where people have an end goal of collaborating and producing the best possible goods and services. One more person I want to highlight for you. I've highlighted her work before. Dr. Sheena Mason and her book, The Theory of Racelessness. This is another public conversation, a secular approach to try to highlight the issue of better collaboration in the workplace. Now, Dr. Mason is what I would consider to be a progressive Christian. From my understanding, she is engaged in an alternative lifestyle, as we might say, but she has ideas that, again, now I don't know if she knows this, but are rooted in the Christian worldview. But these kinds of secular public conversations, we need more of this. We need more alternatives. We need entities that are working on this problem as an alternative to the critical social theories praxis of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I hope you found this teaching helpful. I do look forward to your comments. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this with a friend, share it with your pastor, and someone that you think might benefit from it and be encouraged by it. I want to say thank you to those of you who are pre-ordering our book on Amazon, Walking in Unity. We really appreciate that. Those pre-orders are super important to help send a clear message to the publisher that there are people who are interested in purchasing this type of content as an alternative to other more progressive voices in the Christian space talking about race and racism. Okay, thank you very much to everyone who tuned in. And I don't know if we'll be here next week. Monique will be returning home a week from tomorrow. So who knows? Maybe I'll have another teaching next week for you. If you want me to do another teaching and continue this conversation, let me know in the chat. I'd sure appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. God bless. Bye-bye.